So I had a request on one of my videos this week from Minjong Lee to make a video about gender and masculinity. So these are just a few of my thoughts on what you could discuss about gender and masculinity in Of Mice and Men. For Edexcel IGCSE, you always need to be linking everything to context. So the question we need to be asking ourselves is, what comment is John Steinbeck trying to make about gender in 1930s America, at a time of such social upheaval, going from the Roaring Twenties through the Wall Street crash, the rise of migrant workers, women being pushed back into the home? But what is he trying to say specifically about gender? So one thing we can obviously look at, or one character we can look at, is Curley's wife. And I would encourage you to have a look at my Curley's wife videos for even more things to discuss. But let's think about how Curley's wife is portrayed in terms of gender. So first of all, she is portrayed as a possession. And we see this just from her name. She is Curley's wife. We never know her name. So her identity and who she is completely irrelevant. Her whole being is tied to her being owned by Curley. So John Steinbeck perhaps could be criticising the kind of gender roles between men and women and the kind of unequal balance there is between Curley's wife, who is owned by Curley, rather than being an equal partner. Furthermore, she is judged by her appearances and not her personality. Even John Steinbeck, when he's describing her, he describes her in terms of what she's wearing, the way she leans against the doorway and pushes her body forward, the fact that she wears red mules with ostrich feathers. She is described solely in terms of how she looks like, not who she is. Now, when it comes to the men in comparison, there's a lot more description for each of them about what they are like as a person. But Curley's wife, she is only judged in terms of what she looks like. So if we think of this from kind of a feminist standpoint, she's very much seen through the male gaze. She is portrayed as a sexual object rather than as a fully fleshed out and developed and complex character. Now, this doesn't mean that John Steinbeck was necessarily being sexist. It might be that he was trying to challenge the sexist ideas and perspectives in society at the time. But it's going to be up to you to have a look back at the text to see what you think about that. Now, we've got these really unfair double standards when it comes to Curley's wife. So right from the very beginning, they talk about her being a flirt. The men call her a tar, a rat trap, jailbait. Now, if we think about those words, rat trap, the idea that she's out to trap men. Jailbait, she's kind of trying to bait them, trick them into getting into trouble. She's very much blamed. If the men, were to pursue her and get in trouble, it's not their fault, it's Curley's wife's fault. And so there's that unfair placing of blame solely on her there. But she's very much seen as a flirt. She wants to talk to the men, and the men assume it's a sexual thing and that she is trying to get them into trouble. And there's a whole lot of talk about them, how she's got the eye, she's looking at other men. But yet we have to question, is there actually enough evidence for us to know that she is trying to flirt with the men? Or is John Steinbeck trying to make us think about how she is portrayed through that male gaze? Because in stark kind of contrast, the men, they go off to Old Susie's, which is a brothel. It's fully socially acceptable for them to go and sleep with multiple women. There's no comment on their sexual morals. And yet Curley's wife, there is comment from so many of the male characters. So perhaps John Steinbeck is saying there's this very unfair and stark double standard between the treatment of men and women when it comes to sexual liberation. Even when Slim comes in and he sees Curley's wife, he says, "Hey, good looking." And yet no one says, "Oh, Slim's got the eye," or "Slim's talking to Curley's wife." Instead, it's only criticism is directed one way, and that's at Curley's wife. So there is unfair treatment of the genders there. And also her life is dictated by men's choices. So she wanted to go to Hollywood and she was reliant on a man to give her that opportunity. So this man she met that was going to get her in the movies, he never sent her a letter. Potentially her mother took the letter, we don't know, but it may be that he never sent it. So her dreams were being waited to be fulfilled by a man. And then she went to Curley, and now her life is fully controlled by Curley. He wants her to be in the house. He doesn't want her talking to other men. She is trapped. But her life has not been determined by herself. She has not had the social opportunities to be able to go off and get herself into Hollywood or pursue her own dreams. Instead, she needs to be anchored by a man. Perhaps John Steinbeck is commenting on the kind of limited opportunities that women have because their options are to be tied to a family unit and particularly tied to a man. So in comparison, how is masculinity presented in Of Mice and Men. First of all, perhaps John Steinbeck is asking, what is real masculinity? Because Curley and the boss are very masculine men. They wear these high heels to make themselves taller and bigger. And particularly Curley, he uses his physicality as a kind of threat to other men. So when he realizes that Lenny is vulnerable, he attacks Lenny in the kind of attack scene in the barn, because he sees Lenny as an easy target, a way of kind of proving his masculinity. So perhaps John Steinbeck is challenging this kind of fragile masculinity where Curley has to use violence to show what a man he is. But then we've got Slim in comparison, and Slim is a much more gentle, wise, calm character. And we've got that direct comparison between Slim and Curley when Candy says, Slim don't need to wear no high heels. So Slim doesn't have to put on this violent front or wear high heel boots or strut around. He does not need to do that because he has that innate leadership and attraction to him that people want to listen to him and follow what he says. So perhaps John Steinbeck is challenging this violence and physicality that seems to define masculinity in 1930s America, and perhaps suggesting that masculinity can be much more complex than that, and a much more attractive kind of take on masculinity is something like Slim, who is calm and wise and thoughtful and widely respected. For more on this, I'd encourage you to watch my revision video on Slim and Curley. We've also got to think about the American dream. So if we think about the cultural context of 1930s America, in the 1920s, things were going well for people. You know, financially and economically, America was doing very well. Then there was the Wall Street crash and suddenly everything changed. Now, if you think about men traditionally are seen as the breadwinners, aren't they? They are seen as the people who bring in the money and support the family, and women traditionally are the ones that build the home and are at home looking after children and the house, etc. But it must have been a real challenge to some men's perceived idea of masculinity when they lost their jobs or they lost their income, because suddenly their social role, which is to support the family, they can't fulfill it. And so perhaps John Steinbeck is raising this question of how did the Wall Street crash and the Great Depression affect men's idea of themselves, especially when they're unable to provide for their families, and what does that mean? So perhaps John Steinbeck is questioning what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. So as women like Curley's wife were being forced back into the home after being liberated in the 1920s, perhaps John Steinbeck is questioning, should gender roles be this defined? Should women be the ones in the home? Should men be the ones with all the pressure to support the family? So those are just my first thoughts when it comes to gender, masculinity and femininity in Mice and Men, but I would love to hear what you think. So please do share your thoughts and ideas in the comments, and make sure to like this video and subscribe for all my other revision videos.